Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. This is episode number 45, and today we're talking about 0.89. As usual, I have Phil joining me today. Hey, Phil.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. And we've also got Courtney joining us today. Hey, Courtney.
Hi there.
All the way from Canada as well, Courtney, so welcome.
That's right, a fellow Canadian. I think this is one of the only times we've had a Canadian on.
I was going to say we've outnumbered the other countries tonight.
I know. This never happens. I'm usually the only one. And
Me too.
So, yes, it was perfect. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited.
This episode is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabu Casa. Easily connect to Google and Amazon voice assistants for a small monthly fee that also supports the Home Assistant project. Configurations via the user interface, so there's no fiddling with router settings, dynamic DNS, or any YAML.
Rohan, one thing we've both said we really enjoy about the Home Assistant community is that it's collaborative and welcoming to everyone. And tomorrow is actually International Women's Day, and the theme of which is Balance for Better. And this campaign calls out for all of us to challenge gender stereotypes and bias, to forge positive visibility for women, and to celebrate women's achievements. So today it's important to recognise that we don't often have women on our podcast, so we are especially pleased to be joined today by Courtney, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome. And I hope that there are other women who will reach out and participate as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, please, we highly encourage that. So
0.89.
That's right.
New features. The Nissan Leaf car has a whole new Nissan Leaf platform, which is added to Home Assistant. And it now allows you to do some pretty cool stuff. So you can see the battery status of your car. You can turn on and off the climate control. And you can also start the car charging from within Home Assistant. You can't stop the car from charging. There's an API limitation for that. But yeah, if you have a newer version of the Nissan Leaf as well, there'll also be a device tracker added to Home Assistant. So all those greenies with a Nissan Leaf, welcome, and you've got some cool features there.
yeah, all of this just reminds me that I need to buy a new car because of all the stuff we're doing and everything like that. My car is still, disconnected. It's probably for the best, but it's disconnected.
Well, on an unrelated note, I saw today that in Australia at least, one of the Tesla, the really premium model Insane Mode Teslas, have had a 33% discount. They're now, instead of 250,000 Australian dollars, I think they're only 186,000 Australian dollars to buy one. So
you'll
so
be picking
affordable.
one up tomorrow then.
I ordered two. As soon as I saw that, I ordered two. All right? One in each color.
That's right. But I did hear, on a more reasonable note, I did hear the Model 3, they finally released the $35,000 version, which is kind of what they were touting the entire time, right? So
Yeah.
So that is very cool. So congrats to Tesla for that. So next feature from a release perspective, going back to what we're actually talking about, the Minute Point Hub. So it's a hub by the company Minute or Minuit or MINUT. So you'll be able to see control panels, binary sensors, and sensors connected to the Point Hub.
That's cool. I think they're a European-based company, so yeah, if you're in Europe, you'll be interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a new binary sensor added to Home Assistant. This one is the time of the day binary sensor. So it allows you to specify a time of the day, and you can use either time or sun conditions to use it. So an example I've sort of come up with loosely is that if you have like evening, you might define it, 10 minutes before sunset and, up to midnight or until sunrise. But because the sunset and sunrise always change throughout the year, this allows you to have, to be able to tell Home Assistant when evening is in your home, and then that will slowly adjust depending out throughout the year, whatever the sun position is, and all your other criteria as well. So I guess if you're using templates to do sort of magic and sunset, offset positions in all your automations, now you can define that in one central place in that binary sensor.
Very cool. Owlet baby monitors. So if you have a connected baby monitor by Owlet, so you can, it helps you check your baby's oxygen level, heart rate while they're sleeping. So that's kind of cool. You can also, when you connect it to Home Assistant, sounds like you can also see motion and base station connection status as well on top of the heart rate and oxygen level. So that's kind of neat. I think this is one of the first baby ones we've talked about.
Yeah, and SmartThings has also, the new SmartThings integration has got a lot of updates in this release, and some of those is the ability of covers and scenes. So if you have those defined in SmartThings, they'll now be available in Home Assistant as well.
Also, a Reddit sensor, which basically displays your top topic from a subreddit. So you could use it to say, let's say, for example, Home Assistant. So what is the latest top post of Home Assistant from the Home Assistant subreddit, as an example? It can be any other subreddit too.
It's kind of cool. Actually, on a sort of a tangent to that, I was actually really excited when I saw this Reddit sensor. It reminded me, I have an IFT recipe on my IFT account. It links up Reddit and my Spotify, and I have a few recipes run so that when there's the latest or a new top track trending in, for example, the Chill Out subreddit, it will add it to a Spotify playlist. So that way, if I can have different genres of music in my playlists, and as people are adding that sort of genre music to Reddit, it will automatically update my Spotify playlist with fresh music.
Oh, wow. That's kind of cool. So I guess this Chill Out subreddit is related to music and so on.
Yes,
and so
yes. So and then you can obviously go onto your tangent. You can go rock and roll, and there's obviously a subreddit for everything.
Yeah.
And of course, Reddit comes with trolls, and just maybe once a month I'll just have to go through and remove all the screaming rock and roll music from my Chill Out playlist. But that's fine.
Yeah. It's death metal as you're trying to relax.
Exactly.
As long as there's more good than bad, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's my philosophy. It works more times than I have to worry about it. So yeah, I that's one of my favorite. That's my really only use case for IFT at the moment. It's that and getting timers to make, and the Amazon Echo timers to flash the lights in Home Assistant. But that's only because the Amazon Echo only allows IFT integration for that. But yeah, other than that, yeah, IFT really doesn't play too much of a home automation role for me.
All right. Also, Météo France is now available as a weather component. So if you want to use the French meteorological survey as a sensor in here, you now can do that, especially in Lovelace. So that'd be kind of cool.
For all those cool weather cards. Okay, so another component that's just been added very last minute to the beta release, it's a new mobile app component. Now, this isn't a feature that will be used by anyone except for mobile app developers. So starting from 0.89, if you have the new default configuration component enabled, which we talked about in the last episode, Home Assistant will ship with the mobile app component loaded in your Home Assistant instance. So by itself, this component won't do anything. It's just going to be running in the background. However, this new component will be used by developers for mobile applications such as Android and iOS, which will allow easier and deep integration between Home Assistant and the mobile apps. So, for example, a developer who is making a Home Assistant Android application will be able to have their mobile app talk with Home Assistant via encryption and webhooks without the user needing to set anything up. And there's also tools available for the mobile app to set things up, such as device trackers for the new person component, and of course using the new authentication system for Home Assistant. So yeah, now all we need is a few whizzes with Android to create us a nice native Android app for Home Assistant.
That's right. That doesn't drain your battery.
That's right.
What are you guys using on your Android phones for apps now?
I just have the front end added as a shortcut to my home screen.
Yeah, and I'm a iOS user, so I actually use the official one. Yeah. I use the test pilot one that Home Assistant puts out.
I've been using I don't know if it's Ariella or Ariella on Android.
I saw that one. It was only recently came out, or it's only recently being discovered. I hadn't heard of it until a couple of weeks ago as well.
It's fairly new. It's certainly under very fast development, and it doesn't support like the picture entity card in Lovelace, for example. So there's still some limitations there. But there's a toggle in the app that lets you just use the web, like display the web UI rather than the app UI. So I've got that toggled on. So it's much like having just that home screen shortcut from that perspective, but it does have additional features in that it sends the MQTT triggers back to Home Assistant and that kind of thing. So I've played with a few of them. That's the one I'm working with right now, just because I haven't dug into any others. But having a mobile app component within Home Assistant, I think, will make a big difference for the developers to be able to. Well,
exactly, yeah. And because it's so agnostic as well, it doesn't necessarily have to be for Android. I'm guessing eventually the iOS developers will start using this integration as well for their apps moving forward. And, if there's, in 10 years' time, if there's another platform that's completely taken over Android and iOS completely, then this, agnostic kit will be available for that as well.
Yeah, it'd be kind of interesting. So does this app do location and all that stuff as well?
Yeah, so it has a selection of sort of what you can send back to Home Assistant, and I can pull up the menu if I can ever remember how to find it. Because I'm on the web UI, when I hit the thing that I think is settings, it pulls out the web UI settings, and then I have to remember that there's another spot to do that. But yeah, so on the MQTT, you have a bunch of sensors that you can choose from: battery, Wi-Fi, temperature, light level, Bluetooth, humidity, pressure, pretty much everything that your phone knows is happening. And then as well as, the geolocation.
Wow.
There's a device tracker sort of specifically with update period and position. So how far, how many meters from your position you have to move before it sends an update, whether it uses GPS or Wi-Fi for tracking. So there's quite refined settings in that you can, really get only as much information as you want, but also as pretty much all the information from your phone is available to you.
That's very
really
cool.
Neat. I might have to check that out, actually. All right, some breaking changes in this release. And as we mentioned before, SmartThings has had a few changes going on in this release. And if you are using the new SmartThings integration, you will need to do some reconfiguration as you restart Home Assistant. So once you've upgraded and you restart Home Assistant, just have your phone nearby, and with the SmartThings Classic app, you'll need to get some new access tokens and all that as well. But it won't affect the naming of devices or entities. It's just a one-time inconvenience. Yeah.
Also, any custom platforms that basically have a built-in platform as a component now need to be in the custom components / whatever folder. So basically, if you want to override, let's say, hue and light.py with a custom version, then you need to actually put it in there, and you need to provide a copy over the hue and then init.py and so on and so forth. The documentation will be, that one is a little more complicated, but the documentation will be on the Home Assistant site. So make sure you follow that.
Yeah. So basically, if you are doing any work with custom components, just whatever Home Assistant has as a Python file in their components directory, just make sure you copy that into your custom components directory.
Yeah.
There is now the automatic discovery of TP-Link light bulbs, switches, and dimmers. So they will now be auto-discovered on your network. However, you may need to update your configuration slightly if you've been previously using those. So if you're a TP-Link user, just watch out on this upgrade.
Mm-hmm. Also, we actually have a removal. So the Google Travel Time Update service has actually been removed. So if you used that in the past, you may want to... Essentially, basically what happens is they're standardizing the components, and I believe you can still use it. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Phil. You can still use it, but then you need to actually update the entity ID of the sensor, and then...
Yeah, so remember maybe six months ago, a year ago, Google sort of closed off their Maps API, requiring you had a free tier, and then I think now if you go beyond that free tier, you have to pay to use their Google Maps API. And so rather than, if you go above that free tier, Home Assistant by default will go above that free tier. So now there is the ability for users to have their own, basically through an automation, they can specify when they want the travel time sensor to be updated. So if you're only going to use the travel time sensor for work, you may necessarily want, Home Assistant making API calls on a weekend. So now there was the Google Travel Time Update service. It's now been, everything that has an update entity, which I think also came in with when they did the changes to template sensors, where you had to specify an entity ID, or you could manually force an update of an entity. There is a Home Assistant service. It's called homeassistant.update.
Yeah.
And when you provide the entity ID of that sensor that you want to be updated, it will go ahead and force an update of that sensor. So in this case, you would call homeassistant.update, and then you would pass in the entity ID of sensor.work travel time, and it will know to go out to Google, fetch the latest travel time, and suck that down.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so Fire TV users should now use the Android debug bridge. So in the last episode, we mentioned that there was the ability now for Fire TV users to see what app is currently running. There's a new Hass.io add-on, and there's also a Python library available that uses the Android debug bridge, which will allow you to basically take control of any Android TV device, and this includes the Fire TV. So you should now, from 0.89, you should now use the Android debug bridge to control what apps are running on the Fire TV.
Very cool. So hopefully that makes it a little more efficient too. The tune component has been rewritten. So essentially what that means is if you're using this component, you're going to need a Tune API developer account. And then from that perspective, you now use that for your integrations, and also support for switches and smoke detectors have been removed. So also shout out to Frank, who's super famous for all of his Hass.io add-ons. This is actually one of his first major contributions to the Home Assistant core code base. So there you go. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, well done. Some other noteworthy updates for this release. Once again, SmartThings joins us. Its power and energy attributes have been added to all SmartThings switches, so now you can do some cool things knowing how much energy is being drawn from those switches.
Also, Home Assistant will actually tell you if there's it'll spew out a warning message if your Philips Hue bridge requires a firmware update, or if there's one available. To make sure you update that, which I think is great, especially from a security perspective. If there's any vulnerabilities, anything like that, even if you look at Home Assistant, it's like, hey, go update this.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of cool.
And if you're using a Google Home device, they recently added a feature that would allow Google Home devices to be used as device trackers via Bluetooth scanning. Now, if you didn't want to use this, you were sort of forced to have it. But now there is the ability for you to disable device tracking from individual Google Home devices via the configuration. So, for example, if you've got a Google Home upstairs and you don't want it to do any presence detection via Bluetooth scanning, you can now just either turn that one off, or you can go ahead and, against all your Google Home devices, just say device tracking false, and that'll be disabled for you.
Very cool.
Yeah, I think that one's really important. I was experimenting with that and found that it did not operate in a way that was useful for me at all. So I'm glad that that's split out now.
Yeah, particularly if someone comes over to your house and they might have Bluetooth on for that split second or whatever, and then you've got a new device tracker that's been added and you don't know where it's come from.
Yeah, I was getting like hundreds of them a day. I'm pretty sure that like maybe I just live too close to the road and everyone's truck now has Bluetooth. Like it really seemed like every vehicle that went by was getting picked up. So
oh no. Yeah, especially if you keep one by the window or something like that, then it's especially
we're all so glad that Bluetooth is so much more powerful than it used to be until we got
until this, yeah. Well, exactly, right. Or even if you live in like a condo building or something, or like an apartment where, especially if it's a large one where you got like 30 floors, 40 floors.
Delivery driver comes through with his little scanner to scan your thing. There you go. There's a new device tracker added to your Home Assistant.
Well, exactly. All of your neighbors, all of their friends, all of their family.
Yeah.
Right. So that's not always a bad thing to have that customization.
That's right. And another noteworthy feature that I'm actually really pleased to see, Anders has done a great job to overhaul the Sonos snapshot and restore methods to make them more reliable. So this should allow you to more reliably take a snapshot of the Sonos state, for example, what's playing, what speakers are grouped together. You can then go ahead and play your announcements either through text-to-speech or an MP3 file. And then when you restore things, they should actually come back to the way they were. So previously this was pretty unreliable. I'm actually running a HTTP Node.js Sonos API for my announcements just because of how unreliable the snapshot and restore state was. So I'm really pleased to see that that's been reworked. So thank you, Anders.
That's very cool. So Courtney, this is kind of where we get to talk about you and some of the cool stuff you're doing.
All right, let's see what you've got to ask.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's start with tell us a little bit about yourself and your home assistant journey. Let's call it.
So I got started with sort of the home automation idea. I mean, I listened to a couple of other podcasts, not this one, about home automation, and was aware of, I listened to a lot of podcasts that center around people who are into the Apple ecosystem, and HomeKit was something that came up quite a bit. So I was sort of aware of what was out there, but hadn't really explored anything. And then got a couple of outlets, just a single plug into the wall, and you plug something else into them, and they turn on and off with an app. That was sort of the first foray into it, and I got a couple of those. They were on sale on some cheap site somewhere, and just got them to experiment with. Once I got those, then I got interested in the idea of being able to track the amount of electricity that some of my appliances were pulling. And specifically, I have a freezer. We had a plasma TV at the time, and I just wanted to get a feel of what was drawing electricity in the house, and found a couple of more of those outlets that were almost exactly the same, except they have this ability to track the power consumption over time.
Right.
And that's where I then started getting interested in something other than just, this app on my phone, because the app wasn't set up very well for being able to actually analyze any of this data. So, I mean, I could sort of see, what's happening right now, or like what has happened over the past week on average, but nothing to really give me the information that I was seeking. So I started looking around to see what options there were for, something that would take the data. I knew enough to know that my phone was getting the data that I wanted, but it just wouldn't let me see it in the app. So I figured someone out there had probably come up with some kind of solution. And I was a little bit aware that there were, Home Assistant, and I think OpenHub is the other one that I've heard of from these podcasts. So when I came across Home Assistant and started looking into it, and then realized what a community it has behind it and how quickly it's being updated and all of that, I sort of, decided it was something to try, and started using it just for that power logging feature, really. Then I added a bunch more components really quickly, and tried to authorize a bunch of things that I didn't know what I was doing, and ended up kind of just crashing that whole instance. And so I just laid that one to rest and started over, and have been a little bit more slow in adding things to this one, so that I can keep a bit of a better handle on what's running and where problems might be. But when I got involved in the Home Assistant thing, one of the things that I'd put on my previous iteration before it totally crashed and burned was the original PlayStation component, because we do have a couple of Google Home Minis, and the Google Home app has gotten a lot better over the last 6 months than it used to be. And so it does do a lot of what Home Assistant offers in terms of being able to control all the devices in one app. The issue is that PlayStation is way behind the times, and so there's just no way really to interact with the PlayStation in any kind of automatic way without something additional. So there was sort of this weird Docker container that you had to install for like PS4 Waker that I think ran on JavaScript. Like, it was quite a process. I did manage to get it up and running. And then, like I say, that was the instance that kind of went away. So when I started over, I went and looked into that again and noticed that it was in development to be part of, to be a main component in Home Assistant, and decided at that point that I wasn't going to go through all of that rigmarole to get it going in its current state again, and just wait for it to become part of the main release, which has happened in this latest beta. So that's sort of what got me in, and then what got me to stay.
That's awesome.
So now you're using Home Assistant to remotely turn on the PlayStation?
So, yeah, I mean, I've only had it for a couple of days. The beta came out, I think, Thursday morning, and I spent a bit of time during my work day fiddling around with it on Thursday, and then a bit more time today. But definitely, it'll turn the PlayStation on and off. That's pretty easy and straightforward. And then it's a little bit interesting. PlayStation is a very frustrating system to use in a bunch of ways. So one of the main activities that we do with the PlayStation is watch video on either Netflix or Amazon Prime, YouTube, that sort of thing.
Right.
And we can control a lot of the PlayStation with just our regular TV remote through the CEC HDMI protocol, which is bizarre, but works. And then there's an app for the PlayStation that you can have on your phone that lets you have, again, some control, but neither system has all the control. So it's a very interesting combination. But with Home Assistant, I found like getting it on and off was easy, and then I set up some automation so that, if we turn the PlayStation off, the TV turns off as well, that sort of thing. But then figured out that I can still use the actual media player commands as well as the specific PlayStation ones. So I can change the source. So one of our huge frustrations, again, if we have just the remote and the phone, like if we have the PlayStation controller, plugged in across the room, we can't switch from Netflix to Amazon. Like when we sit down to eat dinner, once we pick one, we're in. We can't get back out.
Yeah, you're committed at this point.
So the cool thing that Home Assistant will allow us to do, and like I've played with it, I haven't automated it yet, but I have played with it and it works, is change the source. So I can tell the PlayStation to go from Amazon to Netflix, vice versa. Or, when it first starts up, we're sitting down to watch TV. It'll be really nice to be able to say the magic words to the Google Home and something like, turn the PlayStation on to Netflix and have it sort of go through the 4 or 5 entry screens to get in there and just be sitting at Netflix ready for us to watch, rather than, powering on the PlayStation and it takes 5 to 10 seconds to spin up, and then you have to push the PlayStation button, and then you have to push OK to log into the user, and then 3 more clicks to get Netflix to start loading.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's a small thing, but when you're doing it a couple of times a day, that 15 seconds of having that done sort of ahead of you is really nice.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's one thing I've actually always hated about the PlayStation is exactly that, right? You need to go. You have to press the PlayStation button, and you have to do like even
the first automation remote I wrote once I had the beta up was an automation that when the PlayStation turns on, press the PlayStation button.
Amazing.
It's a tiny thing that makes a huge difference.
Yeah. That to me, that's table stakes. That should be default.
Well, and that's really cool because even if I don't trigger turning the PlayStation on from Home Assistant, every time we turn the PlayStation on, regardless of how it gets turned on, that gets pressed. So that's really nice.
That's very cool.
It's funny because I think even the big players, I think this has been an issue for Logitech Harmony users as well. Like, for whatever reason, PlayStation will just not play ball.
Yeah.
And I think even if you had a Logitech Harmony, there were still these quirks that you've experienced, but now Home Assistant has found a way around that. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I'm really hopeful. I haven't looked into it in depth, but I was looking around yesterday on some of the discussions around WebOS, which is what our TV is. And so I suspect that with a bit of improvement to WebOS and some improvements that I'm sure will come to the PlayStation component now that it's out, because what we can do between Home Assistant, the app on my phone, and the remote for the TV, I can do everything I need to do in the PlayStation now. And so if we get to the point where what I can do with the remote for my TV is accessible in Home Assistant, then I think we'll get to the point where I can actually make the PlayStation bend to my will without having to touch any other devices. So we'll see if we get there.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you.
So when you're actually changing apps, does it go and is it actually pressing the buttons for you so you can see it flicking out from, like Netflix and then going back into, searching for the YouTube app, or going over here and that to go into YouTube? Or
I'm not sure what it's doing under the hood. I had initially tried to get it to switch apps by sending, so as part of the component, you can send commands, and those commands are things like, X or triangle and up, down, back, PlayStation button, etc. And so I had tried using that to kind of, I want to go down, over, down, whatever. And once you're in an app, you're locked in, and your PlayStation, like, those controls are no longer effective. And so that's where I kind of hit a wall and wasn't I was like, oh great, like now I've waited so long for this thing, and now I'm going to have to wait longer for it to do what I actually need it to do, which really is just to switch from Amazon Prime to Netflix. But then I was just sort of, looking in the services dev tool and just kind of what can I do, and found that I do have the the media player select source option, and I thought, well, what's the worst that happens if I try it? It's just going to give me an error message. So I just typed in my Netflix in there and called the service, and it worked.
Nice.
I don't know what it does. It does flash the screen, kind of like you don't see it go over and down, but it does go back to the PlayStation screen before it goes into the next app. And it also doesn't close the app, which I don't know enough about how the PlayStation works. Again, I'm coming at this just from the watching TV side. My boyfriend's the one who knows about the PlayStation itself, but he says that it leaves the app running. So after I was playing with it on Thursday, he went to shut it down, and there was like 3 or 4 different apps on the PlayStation that were apparently not closed out. I don't know if that affects RAM or usage or anything on the PlayStation level, but I know it annoys my boyfriend.
So speaking of your boyfriend, how many people are in your smart home?
So he and I are upstairs. We have a couple of roommates downstairs, and they've added sort of a slight extra layer of complexity. So we've got a bunch of lights that are all automated now, and making sure that the lights that they need to use are accessible, so that they know how to turn them on and off.
Yeah, sure.
When we just had a light, in our bedroom or whatever, it was kind of a non-issue. But as we brought lights, we got a bunch for Christmas as a gift. And so as we brought them to the rest of the house, we needed to help them understand how to use the system. And they are both iOS users. And so they have the Home Assistant iOS app. Brian, the guy, is pretty tech savvy. And so he was able to set up both their phones with it, just with I haven't made them users or anything, just with the standard login. And they really appreciate that, because trying to add them as family in Google Home was just a little bit complex for what I needed. And then we also have a tablet. Through work, I ended up with a couple of extra iPads. So I've got just an iPad Air 2. And I've got a couple of pictures on my GitHub of how I've got it fancily attached to my wall. But my iPad has the Home Assistant floor plan on it that lets you sort of control the lights and stuff. And then they do use the Google Home Mini as well. I sometimes hear them come in with their, hey dingus, turn on the light. I'm really excited about the idea of using some device tracker stuff, because especially like for them, like they tend to come home or leave, and sort of the lights that are in their space, it would be really nice to turn those on and off. But I've bumped into a couple of issues with that one. So, and then my boyfriend is just mostly annoyed with the home automation stuff. He really likes that we can, go to bed and be lying in bed and turn off lights that we've forgotten to turn off or chosen not to turn off. But especially anytime there's a delay between whether it's, tapping something on the iPad screen or asking Google to do it or using his phone, anytime there's any delay between the request and the actual action taking place, he gets quite frustrated by that. So.
Yeah, it's all about the user experience. Even if, for my Amazon Echo, if the timer alarm is going off and you're yelling at her to turn it off and she doesn't turn it off in a timely manner, that can cause some dramas as well.
Yeah. yeah. That's a common occurrence in my house too. So.
Well, and remembering the right syntax, like with the alarm, I don't know that Google will ever get there, but it would be really nice to be able to just say stop. But you have to preface it with the, hey dingus, stop. And when the alarm is going off and you're in the middle of trying to, get the thing out of the oven that is what the alarm was for, thinking through, oh right, I have to say these extra words is often not the thing you're wanting to do right then.
I think once you do it enough times, then it starts becoming kind of second nature. Mm-hmm. Right.
And we have conversation mode on ours as well. So like if I ask for, a light to be turned on or off, I can then follow that up with, and also something else, which is really nice to not have to keep sort of just repeating that phrase over and over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I need that on my Echo, because that's usually what I end up doing. Hey, do this. Okay, hey, do that.
Do you have yours enabled for follow-up mode on the Echo?
No, I haven't looked again, but when I last looked, it wasn't actually released for me. But I need to double
Of
check
course.
if it is. But I kind of forgot about it, and I just got so used to giving 10 different commands
Yeah.
10 different
Yeah, 'cause
times. But
I found because I'm still using so the Echo is out here in Australia now, but I'm still using the US version because obviously they've got all the features and then they just cherry pick the features for everywhere else. But I remember I've noticed that sometimes once she's finished a command, she'll then wait and see if I want to ask something else, and if I ask her something, maybe half of the time she just will ignore my second request.
yeah.
So yeah, it's not perfect yet. But
Yeah.
we'll get there,
yeah.
I'm sure.
We don't have any of the Echoes, but do they have an indicator light or something that lets you know they're listening?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, yeah. So I got a ring that it lights up on the top, especially the Echo Dots do, and they also the ring will actually face which direction it thinks the sound is coming from. So that way you can, if you've got the Echo against a wall or something, and as you're talking to the Echo, if the ring is facing the wall, you're probably getting a lot of
Reflection, yeah.
reflections off the wall. Yeah, which might reduce the accuracy a bit. So it sort of tries to help you, position the Echo in a nice place as well.
Yeah, my main one in my living room is actually really poorly placed behind my TV, which is where the speakers are too. So if we're watching TV,
Yeah.
then it's basically like you basically have to mute or pause or whatever and say whatever you have to say, because otherwise the Echo just does not pick it up. So I've found that's an issue as well, and or I just have to entirely move it from around my TV as a whole.
Just to give a plug for Google for just a second, now that they don't have their own issues, but one of the really cool things about the Google Home is that it uses, because we have Android phones, it uses the microphones on our phones as well. So the Google Home will always sort of own the conversation. But for example, our speaker is, right next to our TV. We had to move some things around when we got the kitten. And so now there's speakers between us and it all the time. But if we have our phones, near us or with us when we're sitting on the couch. And so it, the speaker still responds and takes the action, but it'll use the microphone in the phone to pick that speech up, which makes it really nice for when you're listening to TV. But you have to sort of be okay with Google always listening.
Yeah,
My biggest complaint about the Google is that phrase that you have to say. You have to say Google every time, and it's such a mouthful, it's just unnatural. I don't think I could. Maybe if they ever bring out custom commands, that would be cool, but...
Does Alexa let you customize what your...
They've got some predefined options, so you can choose her name, obviously. You can choose Echo, you can say Amazon, and you can also say computer, which is sort of like a hack to
Star
Star
Trek.
Trek.
And also we just triggered literally everybody's Echo devices.
Exactly. If anyone had thought they were smart by listening to this podcast and changing their wake word, we just got you good.
Yeah, that's right.
So you can customize them, but I think with the Google Home, you can choose either hey or okay to start off that sentence.
Yeah.
Oh, really? So it's right. So you don't get you can't disable one or the other. So you couldn't say, for the Google Home devices, you couldn't say hey and then.
I thought one triggers just the phone and one triggers both. I could be wrong, but I thought that was the case. But
yeah.
Amazon also has done a pretty decent job with that too. Just even when I listen to TV, I'll hear the ring, or I'll see the ring, light up, and then it'll be like, oh wait, that wasn't for me, and then just kind of quietly go away, kind of thing, right? So I think they've both kind of gotten that down pat.
I noticed that none of us are talking about Siri.
It's you know what I got the new iPhone XS or whatever, and I will say, so before that I had an iPhone 6 for the longest time, and Siri was just absolute garbage, and it has gotten a lot better in terms of it picking up what I say and so on and so forth. And when I use the wake words, it'll pick it up and whatever. But yeah, I don't know that I trust it enough to do my voice, to do my home automation accurately, so I don't use it.
Yeah. I have Apple devices for work, so an iPhone, a handful of iPads, a couple of Macs. I have a touch bar Mac where I'm often accidentally hitting the little Siri button on the touch bar. I'm sure there's a way to disable that. I haven't.
There is. That's the first thing I did. You can actually remove it.
That should have been the first thing I did, especially because it's so close to the fingerprint sensor. And when you're on a web call, it mutes your audio while it's talking to you, so you can't hear what's being said when you accidentally hit that button. But I have 3 or 4 devices in various rooms of the house, and all of a sudden, like Siri will just start nattering on about something, and I'm like, I don't know what the cat said to you, but it's an interesting one. I don't use it for any. The only thing I ever did was played a little bit with shortcuts to teach Siri that when I asked to speak to Google, it could put me straight through. But that's as far as I went with Siri and any deliberate usage. I accidentally tell her all kinds of things.
That's funny.
I think Apple really shot themselves in the foot with their whole HomeKit. Originally, when HomeKit came out, it was you had to get a certain hardware certification from Apple, and you had to be Apple authorized to be a HomeKit device and all that. And then no one was really willing to pay Apple the privilege to sell to their customers with HomeKit. And it sort of just got as that defunct, HomeKit, no one's going to use HomeKit because we're not paying to use it. And then Apple's like, well, we don't have any products to offer for HomeKit integration now. So then they sort of relaxed it a bit and made it a software certification. And now I think HomeKit's starting to pick up now that it's a lot easier for, third-party services and products to integrate with HomeKit. But I think Apple really, set themselves back a few years by
it's pretty silly to kind of insist on that, right? Like it's especially with home automation vendors, they've already got so many standards to pay for, so many different things to pay for. So it now becomes, especially let's say you're a light switch, right? If you're in US, Canada, whatever, you got to get certified. And then on top of that, if you have radio devices, those radio devices need to get certified and so on and so forth, right? So it's just cost on top of cost. And on top of that, like you said, the privilege of being able to sell to people, right? So so I could see that not working well. I think Amazon and Google did a great job, but
Apple will get there someday.
Yeah, eventually. So Courtney, what are you running your instance of Home Assistant on? Or is it like a Raspberry Pi or laptop, or what are you doing?
Yeah, I started with a Raspberry Pi 1B, like the real old one, that I just had laying around. Someone had given it to me to play with. And fairly quickly, I was finding that it was just not quite powerful enough to keep up with things. So I'm still only on the 2B. Again, friends have them lying around that they're not using, that they're willing to give to me. And I've actually got 2 of the 2Bs. So I'm just starting to look into the idea of possibly splitting things up somehow into sort of 2 separate devices. I've got extra computers and things around, but the ease of just having that little tiny Raspberry Pi that just, lives next to the router and plugs right in is really nice. And the images are all, the Has.io stuff is all easy to write to an SD card and configure. So for now, that's how we're doing things.
And you're using Has.io or using straight Home Assistant via Docker or something?
Has.io, yeah.
Yep, nice.
Yeah, and then as of today, I am exploring, and I think I might have it working, using AWS for the database piece. I was having some issues with space and discovered actually I was affected by some sort of FFmpeg bug that was taking up like 16 gigabytes of my SD card.
Oops.
But I did resolve that, and that ended up being a separate issue. But while I was still trying to figure out how to make more space, I had set up an AWS database instance to just write the Home Assistant database stuff off rather than to the SD card, writing them off-site. So that
that'll help your SD card last a little longer too, by exporting a lot of the databases and recorder tables and all that stuff. It's move that off, right? I think that seems to be best practice these days. Especially if you read the Reddit, like Reddit comments and things like that, people are like, "Hey, yeah, move it off," because otherwise you're really taking a bit of a hit on your SD card.
Yeah, it sounds like they're not lasting very long at all.
Yeah.
If you're reading and writing, I mean, it's a lot of ins and outs.
Yeah, for sure.
So what are you using in AWS? Have you got like a Amari or MySQL database like spun up there in AWS that you're just pushing data through to?
Yeah, so it's through their RDS, and they have a plan where it's free for the first year, and then you either have to move it somewhere else or pay for it. So we'll see. We'll see where I end up a year from now on that one. But yeah, it's just a MariaDB database running there, and it sort of set itself up. And like I say, I think it's working. It seems to be working.
So I know for my personal setup, I use the InfluxDB for any long-term data. So anything more than a month would be stored in InfluxDB, and then every month I try and just squish down my MySQL database, because that's where like a lot of the logbook and the history data comes from, which I'm not really looking at post a day realistically, unless I need to see maybe a week, like what happened in the last week, for example. But apart from that, like the MySQL instance, I try and keep as small as possible, and that really affects the reboot times as well, I've found. So if you've got a really big MySQL database or an SQLite database that's huge, then when Home Assistant reboots, it's going to have to load up all the history from that. But with InfluxDB, it's just writing to that. It doesn't read anything out of there, so it doesn't need to. If you've got a year's worth of data in InfluxDB, it's still going to be the same reboot time.
That's good to know for sure.
Might save you some time when you get into a year's time. You're like, oh, I've got 2.5 gig of data. Like, you probably don't need that 2.5 gig of data, so you might better save some money there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and one of the things that does make Home Assistant run very slowly and very painfully is when your SD card is just about completely full, just in case anyone bumps into that.
That it does.
So you mentioned before you're running some smart lights and switches. What products are you using? Are you like using Philips Hue or LifeX or anything in particular?
So we're only Wi-Fi. I haven't got any Zigbee or Z-Wave devices at all. And then the lights that we're using, I ended up kind of accidentally, we got them from a bunch of different sources, but they all ended up being at their base level the Tuya system. So I think one of them is like Smart Life and one of them is Genie, but they're all the same sort of original chip manufacturer in China. And so that's the really nice thing about those. I didn't even know that until after I got them. But as I was starting to look at, how do I integrate my Genie lights and how do I integrate my Smart Life lights, realizing that at least from Home Assistant's perspective, they're all the same. And so that's really nice because it means that they kind of can just all operate on the same thing. The ones that I have that do the power monitoring are a different one. They're VSync, but everything else we've got for lights and outlets are on that Tuya system. And then the PlayStation 4, the TV has WebOS, so it's an LG with that WebOS system. We've got some tiles. I haven't had much success using them for anything responsive yet, but they
the device
exist.
trackers or the presence detection tiles, I'm guessing that you can...
So they're just little keychain.
Yeah, the little fobs,
dongly things. But I haven't had any success getting them to understand when we aren't home. So they seem to just think that they're always here, which, at least is something. And then the Android app, which I'm just starting to play with, and the iOS app that my roommates use, all send back, various data. The iOS one's a little bit trickier because you have to give it permission to either run in the background or not. And so if it can't run in the background, then you'd have to launch the app to get it to send any data, which is just kind of a fun conflict of iOS. And then as of yesterday, we're using Nabu Casa's cloud component as well. I signed up for my first free month to try and see how we can get control of the PlayStation through our little speakers. So.
Nice.
That's very cool. So you mentioned that you attempted using the tiles. Are you using anything else for presence detection or anything else?
Nothing with any efficacy at this point. I just through today when I was looking into things to do this database shift and playing with the PlayStation, I did finally sort of have a light bulb moment and figure out how to get my MQTT events from that app we were talking about earlier to trigger things in Home Assistant. So I've got it set now so that it seems to know that I'm at home because I am, but I haven't left. So it seems that everything we've got is really good at knowing when we're home.
But not when you're not home.
But if it doesn't know that we've left, it doesn't help much.
Could that be because of a data connection issue? Like if you've run out of, for whatever reason, if the tile doesn't have a data connection to report that it's away, could that be an issue there?
The tiles don't make any sense at all. In that, like, the tile should connect by Bluetooth to a phone, and then the phone on whatever connection it's on should be what updates the cloud, and it's all through the cloud, right? Like, the tiles shouldn't be communicating directly with anything on on our network. With the iPhone and iOS, or iOS and Android apps, the thing that I'm bumping into is that I don't currently have Home Assistant set up to be accessible from outside of our own network. And so obviously the phone can't tell the system that it's not home if it can't connect to the system. So that's sort of the hiccup that I'm bumping into with the apps themselves. The last time I broke my Home Assistant system was when I went to set up the SSL and remote access pieces, the DNS and stuff. So I'm a little bit tentative of that because that's what messed it up last time. But I do have the second Raspberry Pi, so I think I'm going to set up that stuff in a Home Assistant instance all by itself and get that working and debugged, and then see if I can merge the two together somehow so that I end up.
You've just created yourself a dev system, like.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I'm running 2 instances of Home Assistant, and I'm trying to move anything that requires a cloud connection or constant polling updates to one Home Assistant instance, and then that will just push its updates out through to the main instance through MQTT, because there is Home Assistant has a system called MQTT State Stream, and there's another one, MQTT Event Stream, which basically allows you to link the 2 Home Assistant instances together. So, for example, I've got some blind engines that are cloud only, and they require a Wi-Fi connection. So I don't want my main instance, bogged down having to update the blind status every, 60 seconds or whatever. Eventually, with all the components loaded, it gets slow. So I'm trying to get the secondary Home Assistant instance to do that, and then when actually does actually update, it'll just push it out through MQTT to the other one, and then the other system doesn't have to worry about loading up another component and platform and all that. It knows MQTT is loaded, pull it down.
Right, so and then the automations and actions would run on that second one.
No, so the primary one would suck down all the data from MQTT, and then when it wants to, for example, open the blinds, it will push something back through MQTT to that secondary instance, and then that secondary instance will go, okay, I need to open up this blind. I know that this blind is a cloud-based blind, so I'm going to push that command out there. So because it's MQTT, like the 2 instances locally communicate very fast, so there's no
extra
delay there. Yeah, exactly. So that's what I'm trying to achieve at the moment, to try and get that main instance, not having to have so many components loaded, because there's, things like the Waze travel time sensor, there's, after ship, all these other things that, aren't mission critical. Like if I walk into the kitchen and the lights don't turn on immediately, I don't want to have to wait, I don't want to have to be bogged down because it's, updating my packages from aftership, or it's, what the drive's like to work for that to kick in. So if I can keep it as lean as possible, I think that's going to improve things. That's my current thinking anyway, so we'll see how it pans out.
Well, I started playing with the Haas CLI event watch, and was a little surprised by just how much was coming through every couple of seconds on that, and the time updates every minute, and the all of this stuff, and I'm like, yeah, that's a lot to be going on. So dividing that up that way really makes sense to me. That having one device to just kind of handle, like you say, it's not the mission critical stuff. It's just all of that repeated checking that needs to happen, and then letting the primary one kind of just handle what actually happens if things change.
So you mentioned before you've got your PlayStation that can actually now turn off and on based on your voice commands. Have you got another automation that's you're really proud of, or anything, or any routines you set up with Home Assistant that make your life better?
So I don't have too much for automations in Home Assistant. I've got a couple in Google Home, sort of like a bedtime one that turns on and off a couple of lights and switches. But the automation that really so far has made the most difference in our lives is that pushing the PlayStation button when the PlayStation turns on. And specifically because the way I have it set up, it triggers when the PlayStation changes from off to idle, right? So it's when the PlayStation turns on. It's not based on an action being triggered from Home Assistant, right? It's not when Home Assistant turns it on. It's just when it turns on. So even if we turn the PlayStation on, I mean, if we turn the TV on, again, it's got that CEC connection, so it'll turn the PlayStation on. Or if you push the button on the PlayStation controller, obviously it'll turn on. But in all of those states, it no longer hangs at that please press PlayStation button to continue screen. So it's super simple, but I think is the one that's made the most difference so far, in that it's affected every time we turn that machine on.
Yeah, that I completely know what you're talking about, and that is the most aggravating thing in the world.
And with it being a built-in component now, I mean, it's easy to set it up. So, even if all you did was get that out of it, I think it would be worth it. Are you guys using areas yet?
I am not.
To be honest, I'm personally not. I think when it first came out, it was literally you could just define an area and put, items in the area. But I haven't really started automating anything with areas per se yet.
I haven't either, but as I'm adding, like when I added the PlayStation, specifically when you add things through that integrations page now, it asks for an area sort of for every item,
right? Just
by default, and I assume that's just sort of on the way to having that be a piece that we actually want to use for stuff.
I don't think there's any services like I'm imagining that eventually in a couple of releases time there might be an area.turnoff lights, for example. And so if you want to turn off all the lights in a room, like the living room, you would just call that service or something to that effect, or light.turnoff area living room. But I'm not sure if it's to that level just yet. I know when it first came out, it was literally just the ability to assign devices to an area, and I haven't looked at it any further yet. So far, groups have been where I've done most of that sort of logic.
Yeah, pretty much exactly the same for me.
Yeah, it's exciting though to see how things are. It's just, I don't know. I love how quickly things are progressing and changing and improving. It's like every 2 weeks there's something else that's exciting.
Always brand new toys.
At least releases tend to come out towards the end of the week. Although now I'm on the beta, which is no good at all.
I'm the exact same. So,
because now I'm spending my work days on, I don't know, Wednesdays and Thursdays messing around with Home Assistants. I may have to rethink that life choice.
Well, Courtney, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll leave links to your GitHub repo, which has got your Home Assistant config on there as well. So thank you once again for making the time.
Thank you guys for having me on.
Thank you so much. All right. Cheers.
Cheers. If you want to share your Home Assistant journey or come on as a guest, reach out to us at feedback@hasspodcast.io. That's HASS podcast.io.
The Home Assistant podcast is hosted by Phil Hawthorne and myself, Rohan Karamandi. For links to topics that we discussed today, check out our show notes on hasspodcast.io.